Would you believe there's a place deep in the jungle where humans and Bigfoot once made a silent agreement? In the misty woods of Yaak Valley, Montana, a retired hospice nurse named Midge lived alone in a wooden cabin tucked right at the edge of the forest. One stormy autumn night, she heard a cry, low, pained, unmistakably not animal. Driven by instinct stronger than fear, she lit her old lantern, grabbed her nurse's bag, and stepped into the darkness. What she found wasn't a hunter or a bear. It was a wounded Bigfoot, bleeding, breathing, and begging with its eyes. She cleaned the wound. She whispered gently, just like she had done with so many patients in their final hours. But that wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a silent pact. Because Bigfoot, it turns out, doesn't just survive in shadows. They remember, they protect, and sometimes they forgive. This story isn't fantasy. It's a reflection of real legends, real places, and a very real truth that nature sees us, holds us accountable, and, if we're lucky, offers grace. Stay with us as we explore this powerful tale of guilt, redemption, and a fragile peace between worlds. Along the way, you'll learn what signs Bigfoot leaves to mark trust or territory, why they chose Midge, a silent widow, as their ally, and how a simple act of kindness lit a spark across generations. Now, dear viewer, where are you watching from tonight? What's your name, friend? And how far do you think this story could travel if we shared it together? From our little cabin to yours, we send love and wonder across the screen. If you felt something stir in this tale, consider liking this video and subscribing. Let's grow a community that believes, not just in Bigfoot, but in compassion, memory, and the magic of stories told by firelight. The night air in Yaak Valley clung like a damp sheet. Too hot for Montana this late in the summer. Too quiet to feel like nothing was wrong. The trees stood still, as if holding their breath. On the porch of a weathered cabin tucked deep along a gravel road only locals bothered remembering, a brown mutt with a grizzled snout stood motionless at the door. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. He just trembled, low in the belly, ears pulled back tight, like he'd heard something out there that didn't want to be named. Inside, everything had its place, not because someone made it tidy, but because someone believed in the quiet order of things. A glass oil lamp flickered near the window, its reflection catching on a pair of boots that hadn't moved since the week her husband died. A kettle hissed softly on the stove, though no one was particularly thirsty. There was an old nurse's bag hanging on a wall hook, clean bandages, shears, tinctures soaked in roots and berries, corked and labeled in careful handwriting. It hadn't been opened in months, but Midge still wiped it down every Sunday. She moved slow, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Every drawer, every cup, every picture had a story, and she didn't rush stories. Her hair was tied back in a gray twist, her spine straight out of habit, her steps soft, like someone who'd spent too many years trying not to wake dying men in the middle of the night. There was only one photo left on the mantel, her husband Thomas in his logger's jacket, eyes squinting into the sun, a wildness to his grin that people either loved or feared. The glass was clean. She didn't cry when she dusted it. She just set an extra coffee cup on the table every morning, then put it back when the day ended. That was enough. The knock on the door wasn't a knock. It was more like a pause in the world. Then a voice, young, rough at the edges. "Ma'am?" When she opened it, the boy didn't flinch. He was maybe 17, maybe older. Dirt on his collarbone, a tear in his jeans, a split across his knuckle that had gone purple. But his eyes were polite in a way that was jarring. He didn't ask to come in. Just said, "Name's Caleb. I'll work for food if you've got some. Don't want to trouble." She looked at his hands. They were scarred in the way hands get when they've lifted more than they were ready to, when they've held onto hard things too long. But the eyes, those were still young. She stepped back just far enough to let him know he could come through the door. But only if he meant it. He ate like someone who hadn't in days, but still tried not to make a mess. She gave him leftover stew, hard bread, a piece of peach from a jar she'd opened last winter. He thanked her after every bite, didn't ask questions, didn't offer more than he was asked. She didn't say much either. They just sat with the dog between them, tail thumping once, then still. Next morning, she found him chopping firewood like it was payment. She didn't stop him. By noon, they were walking the back trail to the creek so she could check on the fence line. He moved through the brush like someone who listened more than he spoke. Halfway down the ravine, he stopped. "You see that?" he whispered, pointing to a branch 10 feet up, snapped clean. She squinted. Too high for a man, too fresh to be from snow. Her fingers hovered near her temple, then dropped. They walked on. By the water, Caleb crouched. These rocks. Someone turned them, like looking for fish or crawlers. He nudged a toe at one, then glanced back at her. Footprints, too, big ones, but they skip, like something walking careful, real careful. That word sat with her. Careful. They didn't speak much heading back. The trail felt different. Not watched exactly, but like something new they'd come through. The sky was darker than it should have been for 5 o'clock. Even the birds weren't saying much. At dusk, she found it. A scrap of coarse gray fabric snagged on the edge of the fence. Frayed, but not like any shirt or flannel she'd ever patched. It was thicker, more primitive, like something from deeper woods than this one. She didn't show it to Caleb right away. That evening, the deputy showed up. Anya Weller. Tough, clean cut, wore the weight of her badge like it belonged to her, but didn't let it crush her spine. She'd been a widow since '87, kept it private, but it gave her a way of reading silences. "Lost a couple goats," Anya said, leaning on the porch post. "Neighbors heard something in the trees, said it wasn't a bear, big, heavy, shook the ground but never showed its face." Midge nodded. Anya studied her a beat too long. "If the weather turns, don't go wandering." Midge didn't promise. She just looked out past the tree line. That night, after Caleb had gone to sleep in the tool shed with an old quilt and the dog curled against his side, Midge went to lock the door. The water bowl was moved. Just a hand's width, but not like it had been kicked or nudged by the mutt. No, it was deliberate. Precise. Next to it, pressed into the dirt, was a print. 5 fingers, spread wide, too wide. Not a bear, not a man. Something had come right up to the porch, had stood there, had chosen not to enter. She stood still for a long time. One hand on the door frame, one holding the latch. The lamp inside flickered. The wind picked up. Out past the trees, something sighed. Not an animal sound, not a growl. It was the kind of sound people make when pain has sat too long in their lungs and finally comes out. Soft, hollow, worn. She didn't cry. She just stepped back inside, shut the door gently, and pulled her nurse's bag down from the hook, sat it on the table, ran her hand across the leather once, slow. She went out to the porch again later, long after the air had cooled and the dog had stopped trembling. She sat in the wooden chair Thomas built the year before the cancer took him. Her hand rested on her bag. "I jiao ti ming jo tru wak," she whispered in Vietnamese, almost without breath. If anyone had been listening, they wouldn't have known what it meant. But something out in the woods did, and it hurt her, and it stayed. The first breath of wind through the pines was barely enough to rustle the needles. But under it, layered beneath the hush of insects and the creak of old wood, came that same low groan again, from the far side of the ravine. Drawn out, wounded, waiting. She didn't light another lamp. She didn't call for help. She just stared into the dark, the way a person stares when they already know what's coming. Not because they're afraid, but because it's finally time. And she wasn't waiting anymore. Rain started like a whisper against the roof. Light at first, like someone tapping to be let in. Then it turned. The sky cracked open, not in fury, but with some deeper ache, and the wind came hauling through the trees as if trying to warn the earth of something it couldn't name. The rain wasn't falling straight anymore. It was hurling sideways, lashing against the windows, searching every crack in the cabin for a way inside. Midge stood at the sink with both hands on the counter, eyes fixed out the window where the dark swallowed the yard whole. The dog wouldn't leave the hearth, curled tight, nose tucked under one paw, tail flicking at every gust that rattled the frame. Somewhere beyond the line of trees, something let out a sound. Not loud, not long, but strange, like pain, like something trying not to cry. She turned, walked to the wall, and took her nurse's bag down like it weighed nothing. Set it on the table. She'd already packed it once before, just in case. Tonight, she packed it again without hesitation. Gauze, salve, her sharpest scissors. A rolled bandage she'd boiled and dried herself. A small bottle of alcohol that was running low. She pulled her coat from the hook by the door, arms slipping in like she'd done this her whole life. Then came the lantern, glass steady in her hand, flame held in that small core of trembling light. She was almost at the door when she heard Caleb behind her. "I'm coming," he said, voice low but sure. "No," she answered, firm. "I can help," he insisted. "You can stay dry." He didn't argue again. But he didn't go back to bed either. She opened the door and the wind nearly took it off the hinges. Rain hit her full in the face, needle sharp. Her boots squelched down the steps into thick mud already forming a path. The dog didn't follow this time, not like last night. She didn't bring a weapon, just the bag, just her hands. The sound came again, lower now, deeper, off the path. She followed instinct the way some people follow stars, through brush bending beneath the storm, past a line of pines that hadn't cracked yet but would soon. Then she saw him. At first it was just a shape, a shadow too large to be real, slumped against the trunk of a fir, breathing like the forest was too small to hold the pain. His legs were curled awkward, one thigh swollen tight under the fur. The fur itself was soaked, plastered against thick muscle and bone, but the injury was clear. A wound torn deep through the meat of the thigh, angry and raw. Not new, not fresh, but festering, like it had been hidden too long. She didn't move closer, not yet. He raised his head, slow, like it took effort just to lift his gaze. And there it was again, in the way he looked at her. Not threat, not instinct, not fear. It was a question, a kind of plea. She crouched slowly, knees creaking, opened her bag with the kind of calm that isn't bravery, just muscle memory. "I'm going to clean this," she said softly. Not because she thought he understood the words, but because they calmed her own shaking. He didn't growl, didn't flinch. His hands, the size of dinner plates, rested open on the ground. One of them shifted, just slightly, touched the earth, then touched his own chest. Not begging, offering, as if to say, "I know what this means." She moved forward and reached for the leg. The moment her fingers met the skin, hot beneath the fur, he winced but didn't move. She worked fast, with the efficiency of someone who stitched up logging accidents in places too far from help. Warm water from the bottle, cloth against infection. She poured the alcohol and he exhaled sharp, teeth clenched, but again, no sound. She packed the wound with herbs, sealed it with pressure and bandage, wrapped tight and secure. Thunder cracked above them like it was trying to split the sky open. Behind her, leaves shifted. She turned her head. Caleb. He'd followed anyway, standing near a cedar, soaked to the bone, face pale in the lantern light. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking beyond. Two more shadows stood in the trees, tall, still, watching. They didn't come closer, didn't speak, just stood like guardians carved from the dark. Caleb took a step back. She didn't stop him. The one on the ground shifted again, this time lifting his head toward the trees, letting out a low, guttural sound, deep and resonant, but not loud. A signal, not a roar. More like the way elders call to children who've wandered too far. Caleb flinched, hands going to his sides. Then the trees moved. Or maybe just one tree, a crack overhead. Midge heard it a heartbeat before she saw it. Limbs splitting, trunk groaning. A heavy pine began to tip, boughs snapping in wet slow motion. She had no time to run, but he did. The creature surged upward with more pain than strength, his arms swinging wide, pushing her with force that lifted her boots clear off the ground. She hit the earth hard, breath gone. The pine slammed down exactly where she'd been, and he collapsed again beside it. Her ears rang. The rain was everywhere now, cold in her collar, mud in her palms. But she was alive, and so was he. She crawled to him on hands and knees, ignoring the pain in her hip. His breathing was ragged now. Eyes closed, one hand still rested near his chest. She pressed her palm gently over his bandage and whispered, not sure why, "I'm here. Don't fight me." From the edge of the clearing came another sound. Not human, not beast, a low tone, echoing, felt more than heard. It wasn't threatening. It was calling, and others were listening. The trees had stopped shaking. The rain had softened, but something deeper had shifted. The forest had gone. Attentive, not quiet, not loud. Just listening. As if some long unspoken understanding was being written in the mud between them. She didn't move for a long time. Eventually Caleb stepped forward. He dropped to a knee beside her, eyes on the creature. "You knew?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I hoped." He said nothing more. Together they sat beside the being that had saved her life before she'd ever finished saving his. Steam rose from the wet fur where heat met cold air. The rain settled into a drizzle. The storm had passed. But nothing felt over. The nurse in her checked his pulse. Slow, steady, alive. He'd wake again. And when he did, they'd both have to decide what came next. But for now, she pressed her hand against the soaked ground, fingers trembling not from cold, but from something older, something like awe, something like knowing she'd crossed a line, and there was no crossing back. And somewhere in the distance, the call echoed again. Not an order, not a threat, just the sound of a door opening, very quietly, in a place most people never knew existed. The storm hadn't stopped. It just changed shape. Less rage now, more rhythm. A slow, methodical beat of rain against the tin roof like someone pacing just out of sight. It was near midnight. The fire in the hearth burned low, shadows pooling into corners of the cabin. The dog had stopped trembling, but his eyes followed the door like he knew someone was still out there. Someone watching. Someone waiting. Midge hadn't slept. Not in the way that counted. Her boots were still caked in dried mud. The cuffs of her coat were stiff with old blood, his blood, and the bandage tape she'd wrapped around her wrist still smelled faintly of cedar sap and ash. She'd washed her hands twice, but her palms still itched with memory. Bracken lay just under the eave of the cabin now, in the driest patch she could offer without dragging him indoors. She'd pulled a heavy tarp over the slanted porch rail, formed a makeshift windbreak. A wool blanket from the guest cot was tucked along his side. His massive body didn't shiver anymore. Not from cold, maybe just from effort. The breath in his chest rose slow but steady, and every now and then, one ear twitched. He wasn't asleep, just resting with the weight of a creature who knew what it meant to let someone else tend him, if only for a night. She kept the lantern low, didn't want to draw more attention than they already had. The silence between the storm surges felt too purposeful, like the woods were holding a breath they hadn't finished letting out since last night. Caleb had tried to stay in the shed again. This time the wind made it clear that wasn't happening. The door kept swinging open, hinge loose and moaning, until Midge finally relented and opened the cabin for him. He stood now near the stove, dry blanket over his shoulders, socks steaming slightly near the fire. His eyes hadn't left the figure on the porch in over an hour. He said nothing, but every time the rain slowed, his hand drifted a little closer to the axe handle resting by the wall. "He's not gonna hurt us," Midge said, not turning her head. just sipping the last of her coffee. Cold, bitter. Caleb didn't answer right away. "He's still awake," the boy finally said. "You can tell. He's listening." "He's not the only one," she muttered. She could feel it too, just beyond the tree line. Not movement, not threat, presence. The kind that made the hairs rise on your arms, made animals hide without knowing why. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was awareness. That feeling of being outnumbered, outguessed, outclassed, and left alone on purpose. She stoked the fire again, quietly. Let the warmth push the chill back a few feet. "You ever tell anyone?" Caleb asked. "About what?" "This," he nodded toward the porch. "Him, what you saw, what you believe." She shook her head once. "You think anybody'd believe it if I did?" He didn't argue. Rain came harder again, smacking the windows with fresh fury. A gust pushed hard against the porch tarp, but it held. Bracken didn't flinch. His chest moved, a low sound slipping from him, almost like a hum. She'd heard it before. Not words, not language, but not noise either. Something ritual, measured, like someone calling out in the dark just to let others know he was still breathing. Then the dog lifted his head. Low growl. Not panic, just alert. Caleb moved closer to the door, glanced back at her. She rose slow, crossed the floor without sound, unlatched the bolt, and cracked the door an inch. The lantern glow spilled onto the porch and stopped. There was something else now, beyond the steps, still in shadow, but close enough to feel. She squinted. Movement, not fast, not hostile, just deliberate. Something stepped forward into the edge of the light. It wasn't Bracken. It was smaller. Still tall, taller than any human, but leaner. Shoulders hunched, posture almost protective. Fur glistened with rain. No weapons, no sound. It stood at the edge of the porch and crouched. Laid something down. Midge stepped forward once, careful not to cross the threshold. Caleb's hand found the axe again. She raised her hand slowly. The creature didn't react, just stood there watching. It turned, stepped back into the dark, and was gone. Midge waited a full minute before stepping out. The wind had died. On the porch board sat a bundle, tightly wound. She knelt, picked it up. Roots, thick, knotted, wrapped in vines and bark. She didn't recognize them immediately, until she cracked one open slightly. The scent hit her nose like pine and bruised mint. Willow, marshmallow, golden seal. The kind of mixture that brings down swelling, draws out infection. Exactly what she'd run out of earlier that afternoon. She turned back toward the door. Caleb had moved to the threshold now, expression unreadable. "They brought medicine," she said. "Why?" "Because he's not alone." They both looked toward Bracken, whose eyes were now barely open, watching her with something between pain and gratitude. He hadn't moved since the visitor came, but something in him had shifted. He wasn't just being protected. He was being watched over. The wind picked up again, only this time it carried a sound with it. A vibration almost, tucked just beneath the rain. A low chord, 3 beats, spaced apart. It came from the trees. She didn't know what it meant. Not exactly, but whatever it was, it made the forest quiet again. Even the crows stopped calling. Later, after the fire had died down to coals and Caleb had nodded off in the rocker, she sat near the open door, watching the dark. Her nurse's bag rested on her lap. She'd refilled the bottle, repacked the gauze. Bracken still hadn't moved, but he didn't look worse. If anything, he looked steadier, like something inside him had resolved. At some point, a small thump made her look up. The dog stood by the door, tail straight, ears cocked. A shape moved near the edge of the clearing again, not approaching, just standing, one hand lifted, pressed gently against the wide trunk of a birch. A breath passed. Then the shape turned and faded into the trees. When Midge closed the door that night, she didn't lock it. She let the wind fill the cracks, let the air carry what it would. She stood in the doorway for a long time, hand on the old wood. and whispered something to no one. Don't be afraid. Not to Caleb, not to Bracken. To them, to the ones watching, and maybe to herself. Because the line was crossed now. This wasn't about a stranger anymore. This was a patient, and this was her post. She set an extra blanket by the fire. Didn't say who it was for. Just placed it there and walked away. The storm kept circling the valley until morning. But it never touched the cabin again. And when the first silver light hit the window, she saw something in the trees. Not one, several. Figures, tall, broad, unmoving, standing still behind the branches, like guards, like family, like a council waiting for day. By dawn, the rain had gone, but the forest didn't breathe easy. It just went still in a way that felt ceremonial. The kind of stillness that made even the wind feel like it was waiting for permission. Everything outside the cabin held its place like part of a picture no one wanted to disrupt. The trees didn't sway. The crows didn't cry. And the clearing, that small strip of flattened earth that separated Midge's world from the trees, was no longer empty. She saw them the moment she opened the door. It wasn't dramatic. There was no charge, no growl, no show of power, just presence. A quiet ring of figures, still as stone, surrounding the cabin at a perfect distance. Not on the porch, not in the yard, just along that invisible line where the forest began again. A line they hadn't crossed. She didn't move at first. Just stood in the doorway with one hand resting on the frame, like she needed something solid to hold her up. They weren't hiding now. There were 7, maybe 8. Hard to count when none of them shifted. All tall, all massive in the way nature builds things to last through winters and wildfires. She could see the range in their shapes. Some broad and muscular, some leaner, quieter. Male, female. Even one small figure among them, standing close to one of the larger ones, fidgeting just enough to remind her it was young. The little one started to take a step forward, but the larger figure reached down and gently pulled it back. No sound passed between them, but the message was clear. Not yet. Not now. Then came movement from behind them, slower, heavier. A figure stepped through the trees with a deliberate calm that made every other presence seem like a shadow in his wake. His fur was ash-colored, streaked with time, shoulders broad, fur along the upper back gone pale, almost silver, like a dusting of snow that never melted. He didn't walk with a limp. He didn't bow. He didn't carry a weapon or show his teeth. He didn't need to. She knew instantly. This was no scout, no hunter. This was a leader. He stepped forward and stopped just shy of the muddy threshold, his gaze steady on her. Midge stepped outside, closing the door behind her. She didn't bring anything in her hands. No offering, no tools, just herself. She walked across the clearing, boots crunching softly on damp earth, until she stood halfway between the porch and where they waited. She could feel Caleb watching through the window. The dog didn't bark. The line of Bigfoot didn't flinch. The old one, elder, she thought without knowing how, tilted his head slightly, like he was reading something invisible around her. His eyes weren't the eyes of a beast. They were old, human in some impossible way, but deeper, like looking through smoke into something ancient and unmoved by time. Bracken stirred on the porch behind her, lifting his head slowly. He tried to rise. His leg dragged. Midge turned as he struggled to one knee, one massive hand gripping the porch beam for balance. He didn't cry out. He didn't look to her for help. He pushed himself upright the way someone does when they know they're being watched by the people who matter most. His leg trembled. His breath came ragged. But he stood. And then, step by dragging step, he moved toward her. The others parted just enough to let him pass. Not one hand reached out to stop him. Not one foot shifted to aid him. This wasn't about helping. This was about letting him choose. When he reached her side, he stopped and knelt. Not in defeat, not in submission. He dropped to one knee and placed his hand to his chest, then pressed it gently to the earth. Midge felt her throat tighten. It wasn't a gesture of surrender. It was thanks, a recognition. The elder stepped forward. His eyes never left hers, and in one slow movement he crouched, hand to the earth, then chest, then lifted toward the mountains behind them. It wasn't a threat. It was a line. This place here, this cabin, this clearing, could remain untouched, safe, watched. But there were places beyond, he was saying, places not meant to be crossed. Midge didn't ask questions. She didn't need to understand every wordless symbol to know what he meant. She placed her hand on her own chest, then mirrored the motion, toward the earth and back to him. The silence that followed felt like the world taking a breath after a long tension. And then, one of the younger figures stepped forward, tall, lean, eyes sharp, and moved to Caleb's firewood stack. No aggression, no fear, just curiosity. Caleb opened the door slightly, ready. But before he could speak, another of the larger creatures stepped up behind the younger one and gently pulled them back by the shoulder. The elder turned to glance at the cabin again. Then he gave a single nod, slow, decisive. And with that, the entire group, except for one, began to turn and melt back into the trees, their silhouettes folding into shadow like smoke being drawn away. The one who stayed was small, the same young one from before. It looked at Midge, tilted its head. Then it ran, just for a moment, toward the porch. Midge tensed, but didn't move. The child placed something on the wooden steps, something wrapped in dry reeds, tied with a loop of knotted bark. Then it looked up at her, big eyes, not wild, not tame, just watching. Then it turned and sprinted after the others, legs long, movement silent. And the clearing was empty. No one spoke for a long time. She walked back slowly, steps soft. Caleb opened the door just enough to see her expression. "What did they want?" he asked. "Not what," she said. "Where?" She knelt on the porch and picked up the bundle. Inside, wrapped with care, were crushed roots, a shard of smooth agate, and something that looked like a carved tooth, etched with markings that didn't belong to any alphabet she knew, but pulsed with intention. She didn't try to explain it. That night she sat out again on the porch. Bracken lay curled under the eave, breathing easy. Caleb sat across from her, arms crossed, eyes flickering with questions he hadn't found words for yet. "Are they gone?" he asked. Midge shook her head. "Not gone, just returned." "To what?" She looked up at the stars finally breaking through the clouds. The scent of wet pine filled the air. "To wherever it is they watch from." No one said anything else. But inside the cabin, the extra cup was back on the table. And now there was another beside it. Not for ghosts, for guests, for the ones who didn't speak but still listened, for the ones who knew where to stand and where not to. And somewhere farther off, in the woods past the stream, a sound like drums being played through the soil whispered again. Not music, not warning, just a reminder that the line had been drawn and it was being kept. The first gift came at dawn. Midge didn't notice it until the second time she stepped outside that morning. The air was still heavy with the tail end of winter, mud wet and clinging, the breeze sharp but not biting anymore. The sun sat low, slipping through branches like it hadn't decided yet whether it was welcome. She was gathering kindling when her boot bumped something solid at the base of the porch steps. It didn't clatter. It didn't roll. It sat there waiting, a stone. Agate, smooth and oval, with a sheen like river glass. Not a rock someone had kicked from the woods. It had been shaped, edges worn, surface buffed like it had passed through hands that knew how to polish time. She crouched, picked it up. The weight in her palm was gentle, deliberate. It was placed, not lost. By the time she'd set it on the porch rail and turned back toward the woodpile, she noticed the second. Not a stone this time. A bundle, tight and rectangular, wrapped in thick grass and bark twine, resting right where the garden path met the shed, like someone had followed the natural lines of the property, found a center point, and laid it down like a marker. Inside the bark, tucked between layers of pressed moss, was a slat of carved wood. Not painted, not fancy, carved with intention, no more than 3 fingers wide. Lines ran across it, etched and smooth, some branching like paths, others forming shapes almost too abstract to catch. She stared at it, then at the tree line. They weren't guessing anymore. They were mapping. Each gift after that came closer. A feather bundle tied tight with woven grass and a thick braid of horsehair, gray and black, placed just beneath the kitchen window, where she liked to rest her elbows and listen to the wind. Another root bundle, buried just enough to keep it dry, but not hidden, marked by a small ring of stones that hadn't been there yesterday. They weren't trying to decorate. They were trying to teach. Caleb watched from the shed, shovel in hand. He didn't speak until midday, after she found the last offering. "I don't think they're doing it for him anymore," he said quietly, eyes flicking toward the porch where Bracken lay, drowsy, healing, breathing steady. "I think this is for us now." She nodded but said nothing. That afternoon, Anya Weller's boots appeared in the mud beside the drive. Her cruiser parked a quarter-mile back, hidden behind a downed log. She wasn't in uniform today. Jeans, wool coat, the kind she wore when she didn't want to be seen as law, just someone who still believed in asking before accusing. "Got a minute?" she said. Midge opened the porch door. Anya didn't come up all the way. Her eyes scanned the tree line like someone who didn't want to miss what might be watching back. "I saw the new trail markers," she said. "Rocks stacked like somebody's laying out directions." Midge just looked at her. "I didn't follow them," Anya added. "Didn't feel like I had the right to." Midge stepped aside and let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. The stove hissed gently. Bracken stayed outside, quiet. "I need to ask something, Midge," Anya said, keeping her voice even. "And I need you to know I'm not here to write it down." Midge waited. "Is this a negotiation?" she asked finally. Midge looked out the window. "I think it's a warning wrapped in kindness." Anya leaned back, exhaled. "I've got hunters sniffing around. Reports of movement in the hills. Livestock going missing. No tracks, no blood. Just gone. And there's rumors now, folks talking in low voices about things in the woods." "Well, let them talk," Midge said. "That works," Anya said, "until someone goes in with a rifle trying to prove they're right." Midge turned the stone over in her hand. "They're not the threat," she said. "They're the line between us and the threat." Anya watched her a long moment. "And if someone crosses it?" Midge's jaw set. "Then it's not just about protection anymore." Anya stood slowly. "I can adjust the reports," she said. "Say it's wolves, storm damage, things folks already understand." Midge gave a faint nod. Anya stepped to the door, but before she left, her eyes settled on the wood carving resting on the windowsill. "That one," she said, pointing. "That's a map." Midge didn't ask how she knew. Anya didn't say how. She left without another word. Later that afternoon, Pastor Linus Crowell showed up. No warning. Just his old Ford pickup idling at the edge of the driveway. Dust from the wheels curling behind him like smoke from an old altar. He stepped out in his Sunday boots, not even glancing at the porch, just staring out toward the trees like someone visiting a place they used to know in another life. "Am I interrupting something holy?" he asked gently, as Midge came around the corner. "You know I stopped believing in holy when Thomas died," she answered. He nodded. "You didn't stop. You just changed the shape of what you pray to." They didn't say much more. He didn't ask about the stone, or the feather bundle, or the figure he surely saw in the distance between the trees. He just said, "You get to decide what happens next, but whatever it is, be ready for it to cost." She offered him tea. He declined. As he drove away, Bracken lifted his head, watched him go, and didn't blink. That night after dinner, Caleb lit the fire without being asked. He folded the laundry before Midge could touch it. She didn't comment. She just handed him a bowl and let him sit at the table like he'd been born to that seat. He looked at her for a long time. "You think they're trying to keep us safe?" he asked. "I think," she said softly, "they've already seen what happens when they don't." She didn't look at him when she said it. She didn't have to. Around midnight, something scraped just lightly against the porch. She opened the door. A stone. Large, heavy, placed squarely at the foot of the top step. Its face had been sanded smooth, unnaturally smooth. But what was carved into it wasn't a symbol. It was a line, one deep blackened groove, cut straight down the center of the stone's face. Not decorative, not accidental. A boundary, not between species, between intent. She didn't sleep that night. Just sat near the window with her cup of coffee gone cold, eyes fixed on that stone like it might start speaking. The next morning the line hadn't moved, but something else had. All around the cabin, where paths had once been open, trees had fallen, not randomly, not messily, but placed, felled with care. Like someone had reshaped the traffic of the woods overnight. Not blocked, redirected. The cabin was still open to the world, but only to the parts of it that knew where to stand. That afternoon she found Caleb sitting on the porch, fingers resting on the carved wood map like he was trying to memorize it. He didn't look up. "You think they're watching us right now?" Midge nodded. "I think they always were." He glanced toward the line of trees. "I hope we don't screw it up." She smiled, just faintly. "So do I." And just before dusk, Blaine Haskett showed up. He didn't come onto the porch. He didn't call out. He just stood at the edge of the yard, hat in one hand, eyes squinting toward the house like it wasn't just a cabin anymore, but something buried deep he couldn't quite name. He stayed there a long time. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, but the look he left behind didn't go with him. It stayed, and it promised he'd be back. Spring didn't arrive with sunlight. It arrived with mud. Yaak Valley thawed slowly that year, as if reluctant to let go of the cold. The snow didn't melt so much as sink into the ground like old regret. Trees held onto frost a little longer. Shadows lingered deeper in the hollows. The air still smelled like wet iron and pine bark split by winter winds. And people started looking for someone to blame. It began with a single cow, gone without blood, tracks, or sound. Then 3 goats up near the old mill road. Then dogs barking at nothing, their tails tucked so tight you'd swear they'd seen ghosts. Folks whispered at the diner. Hushed tones behind hands, glancing toward the windows when a gust moved the trees too hard. Stories crept back. Things that used to stay buried under coffee cups and church hymns started slipping through the cracks. They said something was back in the woods. And maybe it was. But what they really meant was, someone had to answer for it. Blaine Haskett, in his usual corner seat at Stella's cafe, let the talk swell just enough before he spoke. His voice didn't rise. He didn't bang a fist. He just leaned in with that look, like a man too tired to lie and too angry not to say it. "And whatever's out there," he said, "we can't let it get too close. Not again." He never said what again meant. He didn't have to. By the time his coffee went cold, a half-dozen heads were already nodding. Caleb felt it first. At the gas station, the post office, the back steps of the market where folks used to offer him work or a cup of something warm. Now it was different. Shorter conversations. Less eye contact. One man asked, real casual, what exactly he was doing up at Midge Callahan's place. "You been staying out there all winter?" the man asked, smiling like it was small talk. "Helping," Caleb answered, keeping it light. The man's smile didn't change, but his eyes did. "Helping what?" At the cabin, Midge noticed the shifts, too. Footprints near the edge of the drive. Too many to be hers or Caleb's. Boot prints, men's size. Waiting just long enough to make their presence known. Then gone. Not trespassing. Not yet. Just watching. The gifts had stopped. No more carved maps, no feather bundles, no polished stones at the steps. But the forest was still moving. Trees fell in careful patterns. Paths blocked, rerouted. Deer didn't run the same trails. And some nights, deep past the porch light, a low thrum hummed beneath the soil, faint as heartbeat in the distance. Blaine set his first trap in the clearing behind the school. A steel jaw sprung fresh from the box, baited with deer meat and wired to a bell rigged just high enough to ring through the trees. Midge found it by accident while checking the stream near dusk. She disarmed it with bare hands, left it in pieces near the trailhead with a pine cone on top. The next morning, a new one appeared, closer this time. This one was crushed, flattened under something heavier than a bear, bent in a way no human could have managed. Not torn, just replaced. Midge stood staring at it, feeling that old chill that didn't come from the weather. Caleb found her there, arms crossed. "They're warning him," he said. "No," she said softly. "They're warning us." At the sheriff's office, Anya sat behind a desk stacked with reports. Livestock gone. Children hearing things outside their windows. Hunters claiming blurred shapes near the river bends. "They don't say it out loud," she told Midge later that week, standing on the porch, boots muddy. "But they're circling, trying to find a story simple enough to shoot at." "Plain," Midge said. Anya didn't deny it. "He's stirring them. Talks like he's keeping them safe." "And what are you doing?" Anya looked at the forest, the edges of the yard, the stack of wood Caleb had built the night before. "Writing the damage off as coyotes, weather, logging stress." She looked back. "Lying. For now." Midge held her gaze. "That lie going to last?" Anya didn't answer. At church the next Sunday, Pastor Crowell delivered a sermon so calm it felt like snow falling on kindling. He didn't say fear. He didn't say monsters. He said responsibility. He said humility. And when Blaine stood after the final hymn and declared, "We can't sit quiet while something waits in the dark," not a soul stopped him. They didn't cheer. But no one stopped him. That night, Midge heard it. Not a growl, not footsteps. Silence. The kind that falls when even the crickets know to stay low. She stepped onto the porch. Every path in and out of the cabin had been lined with fresh pine. Cut branches. Mud rubbed smooth to erase scent trails. A message. She didn't sleep. She waited. And just before sunrise, Caleb found her standing barefoot in the doorway, eyes on the dark tree line. "They're watching," he said. She nodded. "They know what's coming." He stepped beside her. "Do we?" Midge looked down at the mug in her hand, stone cold. "I think it's already here." That afternoon, Caleb walked into town for supplies. Bread, salt, ammunition, if they'd sell it. They didn't. Blaine was waiting outside the store, leaning against his truck, arms crossed. "Kid like you," he said, "ought to be careful where he sleeps." Caleb said nothing. "You get comfortable out there. You start thinking you belong. Start thinking you know what's best for people who've lived here their whole lives." He tossed something small into Caleb's hands. "A broken arrowhead. Old, dull. Found this near your cabin. Thought maybe you dropped it." Caleb didn't flinch. Blaine smiled, soft. "You ever see what a real monster looks like up close?" Then he got in his truck and drove off. Caleb walked the 3 miles home in silence. That night the wind shifted. Something in it felt off, like static, like pressure building under skin. And then, around midnight, the dog began to bark, not wild. Warning. Caleb and Midge stepped outside. The clearing beyond the porch was empty, but the trees weren't. One by one, trunks began to shift, not sway, shift. Figures emerged, not charging, not sneaking, just there, present, 3 on each side, standing along the boundary, not crossing, not leaving. And then, without sound, a path opened between them, branches bent, stones rolled aside, the rangers of the dark stepping into position, not to attack, to contain. Something was coming. And whatever it was, they weren't letting it reach the cabin. Midge stepped back inside, closed the door softly, whispered something to the old floorboards as if they could carry messages into the walls. She poured hot water over dried leaves, set a second cup down. Caleb stared out the window, and far off in the woods, a single gunshot cracked through the night like the breaking of something that had held too long. Not the beginning, not the end, just the point where silence stopped being an option. The forest didn't sleep that night. It waited. After the shot, everything inside Yaak Valley shifted. The wind lost its rhythm. Birds didn't return to their trees. Even the creeks, which usually whispered in the dark, seemed to hold their breath. What had cracked through the timber wasn't just the echo of gunpowder. It was something older. A warning, a mistake, a crossing. At the cabin, the sound reached Midge like it always had. Not as noise, as message. She'd heard enough final breaths in her lifetime to know what came before them. But this wasn't final. Not yet. Caleb stood in the doorway, jaws set, fists clenched at his sides. That was close. Midge didn't answer. She moved to the kitchen counter with the calm of a woman long past panic. Poured water, set a mug down that she wouldn't drink from. "They're baiting them," she said finally. "Trying to draw them out. They think if something bleeds, it becomes real." Caleb looked at the window. There were no shapes in the trees, no eyes glowing back, just darkness. But both of them knew better. He turned to her, voice low. "We can't let them pull this place into it. They're going to try to force it right onto your porch." She nodded once, quiet. The next morning it started. Blaine didn't come back into town alone. He brought a circle with him. Familiar names, familiar faces. They didn't talk loud, they didn't make signs, but they walked behind him like something had finally snapped. Like they were done waiting for proof. Midge heard it from Pastor Crowell first. He didn't call, he didn't send a note, he just arrived. She opened the door before he knocked. "They're planning something," he said, stepping inside without asking. "Tonight. I don't know how far they're willing to go, but the way Blaine's talking, he's not just looking for answers. He's looking for punishment." Midge stirred her coffee slowly. "What's the charge?" she asked. Crowell gave a dry laugh. "Truth, maybe, or the part of it they never wanted spoken out loud." She didn't look up, just said, "Then it's time to tell it." That evening, the sky turned to copper. Clouds hung low like they'd been waiting for the earth to crack open beneath them. Midge gathered what she needed. An old coat, her nurse's bag, and the envelope she hadn't touched in years. The one with her husband's name on the front in faded ink. Caleb met her at the door. "You really gonna tell them?" "Some things get heavier the longer you carry them," she said. "And some things, if you set them down right, they stay down." She didn't ask him to come. He didn't ask her not to go. By the time she reached the center of town, they were already gathered. Not a mob, not yet, but close. Blaine stood near the flagpole. He wasn't shouting. He never had to. The crowd bent toward him like trees in wind, taking his silence as gospel. "We've waited," he was saying. "We've given space. We've let the rumors circle and the lies settle. But now things are disappearing. Animals, safety, sanity. And I say, enough's enough." Eyes turned as Midge stepped into the gravel. She walked with the kind of calm that made people quiet without knowing why. She stopped just short of the old courthouse steps, faced them all. "I know what you think you're hunting," she said. "But let's be honest. You're not hunting anything. You're afraid of something that doesn't belong to you." Blaine narrowed his eyes. "Then say what it is. Say what's out there." "I don't need to," she replied, "because it's not a monster." She pulled the envelope from her coat pocket, held it up. "This," she said, voice steady, "is a copy of the permit my husband signed in 1972 to cut a corridor straight through the old growth up on Miller Ridge. It split a migration path, killed a medicinal spring, and it ended something sacred we never understood." She looked right at Blaine, and I said nothing. For 20 years I sat on this, because I thought staying quiet made it less my fault. A beat of silence. And it didn't. Blaine's jaw tightened. "That's just paper. It doesn't explain what's taking livestock. It doesn't explain what I saw." Midge stepped forward, eyes locked on his. "You saw eyes in the trees and assumed threat. You heard silence and mistook it for plotting. But what you missed is this. They've had every chance to hurt us, and they haven't." A murmur rippled. "They've watched, they've warned, they've helped, and all they've asked for is distance." The crowd shifted, uncertain. Blaine's voice rose. "We've lost goats, cows, dogs. We have the right to protect what's ours." "And what if they feel the same?" Midge snapped. "What if they've been protecting theirs from us this whole time?" Her voice broke, just slightly. "What if we were the ones who came too close first?" The wind stirred, dry, unforgiving. Blaine stepped down from the sidewalk, closer. His eyes were hard, but his hand wasn't on a weapon. You want to tell stories? You do it from your porch, he said. But tonight, we're going in, with or without your blessing. Midge didn't argue. She just turned, walked away. But not toward home, toward the woods. Caleb met her at the trailhead. His face was pale, but his jaw was firm. They'll follow, he said. I know. They won't listen. I'm not talking to them, she said. I'm talking to the ones who might still be listening. They didn't light a lantern. They didn't carry rifles. They walked through the trees in silence, and behind them, in the dark, boots began to follow. When they reached the edge of the clearing, the air changed, heavier, still. Not a sound, no birds, no wind. And then, slowly, bodies emerged. Tall, massive, watching, not moving forward, not retreating, just waiting. Caleb stood beside her, breath tight in his chest. Then, behind them, Blaine's voice rang out. I knew it. Flashlights cut through the clearing like blades. Figures moved through the underbrush, rifles lifted, adrenaline tight in their hands. But the shapes in the trees didn't react, didn't growl, didn't flee. Then something else happened. The earth shifted. Subtle, a low thrum moved through the dirt like a distant drum. A single sound, one beat, then silence, then again, a rhythm. From all directions, not loud, but felt. And with it, panic. The men froze. Flashlights shook. Someone cursed. A gun clicked. Midge raised her voice, low but clear. Don't fire. But the line had already frayed. Something snapped. A shot rang out, ricocheting into the trees. Then a gust of wind tore through the clearing, sudden and precise. A tree fell behind them, not random, not wild, blocking the way back. The forest had answered, but not with violence, with choice. The lights dimmed, one by one, as if the batteries had been swallowed whole by the dark. And in the hush that followed, a single shadow stepped forward. Not Elder, not Bracken, but one Midge hadn't seen before. Slightly taller, eyes not angry, but ancient. He carried nothing, just stepped forward, placed something in the dirt. A bundle of leaves, then turned and vanished. The others followed. The night exhaled, and the clearing was theirs again. Blaine stood frozen, unwounded, unharmed, but unraveled. They hadn't attacked. They'd let him go. On purpose, so he could return. With that weight. Midge didn't say a word. She just looked at him, then at the trail behind him, then turned toward home, and never looked back. The fever came slow. It started with a weight in her limbs that wouldn't shake, then a heaviness in her chest, the kind that made breathing feel like remembering. By the second night, the blankets were soaked through. Her skin flushed, then chilled, heat rising off her like the last smoke of something burning itself out. Caleb noticed first. She tried to wave it off, said it was spring dust or the wind from the river. But by morning she couldn't get out of bed. Her voice was low. Her hands trembled, even holding a spoon. But her eyes never left the window. She wasn't watching the forest anymore. She was waiting for it. Outside, the days moved quietly. Bracken had disappeared back into the trees weeks before, healed enough to vanish without farewell. But the paths he left stayed altered. No new gifts had come, no bundles, no feathers or stones or carved lines. Just the unchanged silence of something that had seen enough, decided enough. The clearing stayed still, but it wasn't empty. There was a presence now, not loud, not seen, but felt, just beyond the ridge. A watching, a waiting. And then the wind shifted again. On the third night, as the fire burned low and Caleb read silently nearby, the door creaked without breeze. The stack of kindling outside had been added too, split clean, dried, laid in a crosshatch pattern Midge knew well, one she used when she still worked hospice full-time, back when she'd leave wood for neighbors too proud to ask. Caleb stood there a long time just staring at it. He didn't say a word. He just brought it in. On the fourth night, the shed was full. More wood. A folded tarp that hadn't been there yesterday. A new cord of rope coiled neatly on the wall. And beside the door, half covered by pine needles, a small, rough spun bag made from coarse fabric, tied at the top with a simple loop of vine. Caleb brought it in. Midge was too weak to sit up, but her fingers found the string. She untied it slowly. Inside were roots, dry, pale. Some she didn't recognize by name, but her nose remembered them. Her hands knew the texture. The same blend she'd used on bracken. The same blend she'd ground by hand. They'd brought it back. They remembered, and they knew she needed it now. Caleb brewed it in a teapot that hadn't been used in years. She drank, and that night her breathing eased, only a little. But it eased. She didn't speak much. Didn't need to. Most of her thoughts drifted to Thomas, his rough laugh, the way his hands used to shake sawdust from his cuffs. The things he'd done that she never stopped loving him for, and the things he'd done that she never forgave. She wondered if it was too late to stop carrying them both. In the quiet between her dozing, she heard things. Soft knocks on the wall, the door creaking closed when the latch hadn't caught, the sound of boots outside, then not boots. Something else. Lighter, quieter. The night before Caleb left, she sat up for the first time in days. He was at the table packing a knapsack. She watched him for a long time before speaking. "You going far?" He turned, paused. "I think it's time." She nodded. "You don't belong to stillness," she said. He gave a half smile, eyes damp. "I didn't belong anywhere. Not until you set that extra bowl." He didn't say thank you. She didn't ask him to. He kissed her forehead the way a son might, then disappeared into the gray edge of morning. She didn't watch him go. The cabin got quiet again and stayed that way. By the fifth morning, she couldn't get out of bed at all. No visitors came from town. No phone calls. Even Anya didn't stop by. People stayed away when they didn't know how to face what was changing. But the woods didn't stay away. That night, the door rattled gently and closed without help. The fire didn't go out. In the early hours, the woodshed door creaked open, and a gust of wind knocked the latch into place. She didn't see any of it. She just felt the cabin breathing with her. At dawn, she opened her eyes and found a shape at the foot of her bed. A bundle, rough cloth, coarse fabric, tied with the same vine loop. But this time, it wasn't medicine. It wasn't survival. It was something else. She untied it with trembling fingers. Inside was a metal button, tarnished, familiar. The kind that used to fasten Thomas's logging jacket. The one he'd worn the day he didn't come back. The one she never found. She stared at it for a long time, held it to her chest. They'd been there. They'd known. They'd seen her grief, her guilt, her silence. And instead of judgment, they gave her back the piece she thought was buried. Not to punish, to let her forgive herself. When the sun rose high enough to push shadows back from the trees, she pulled herself to the porch one last time. Wrapped in blankets, breath slow but steady. She didn't call out. Didn't need to. They already knew. Across the yard, just at the tree line, Elder Pale Shoulder stood. Not for long, just long enough. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He bowed his head once, the way someone does at the end of something earned, and then he turned and was gone. She didn't cry. She just leaned back in the rocker Thomas built, held the button to her chest, and closed her eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was being left behind. She felt watched over, like the cabin had become a marker. Not a secret, a place between. Somewhere two worlds met and nodded, then kept their promises. That night a light rain came, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. The fire didn't need to be stoked. The door stayed latched, and in the far woods, not loud, not close, came the faintest sound. A knock, then another, then silence. But not the kind that meant absence, the kind that meant presence. Still, and always. Some stories don't need to be loud to last. Some truths come not with thunder, but with footsteps that choose not to cross the line. In the end, what matters most is not what we saw or what we feared, but how we chose to respond, whether we met the unknown with violence or with patience, with trembling hands or open ones. There are places in this world where silence isn't emptiness, it's reverence. Boundaries are not walls, but quiet understandings between lives that may never speak the same language, yet still know how to listen. And sometimes kindness isn't a declaration. It's a blanket folded quietly at the foot of the bed, a bowl set for someone who may never come, a door left unlocked because trust was earned. The world often teaches us to speak louder, fight harder, defend what's ours, without ever asking who we're defending it from. But sometimes the deepest strength lives in restraint. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is not strike back, but step back and let mercy shape the ending. Because at the heart of every great story isn't power, it's understanding. It's the courage to look at something wild and say, I see you. I won't turn you into a threat just because I can't explain you. And it's the grace to say, even when we've made mistakes, I was wrong. But I am still here, and I still want to do right. That's what keeps the fire warm. That's what keeps the trail clear. That's what carries the story forward. Not in books, not in history, but in how we treat the next soul who steps into our life with their head down and their hands empty. No creature, no person, no being ever forgets kindness. Not the quiet kind, not the steady kind, and not the kind that doesn't ask for applause. So if you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, unheard, remember this. Sometimes the ones who are watching over us don't need to be seen. They just need to know we still believe in the good they leave behind. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story moved you, even just a little, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what stayed with you, what made you feel something real. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell, and stay close. There's more to come. Some stories start with a whisper, but they stay because someone was willing to listen. We'll see you next time.